Hello, my name is Davóne Tines, and I'm a singer and creator. And I'm really happy that you've taken the time to join us today. And thank you very much to Lincoln Center for providing us some support and some space to have this conversation. I'm going to wait just a little bit for more people to join in on the live, and then we'll get started. So again, I just wanted to say I'm Davóne Tines. I'm a singer and creator, and I'm really thankful that you've taken the time to join us today in this conversation. So here we are on this day, a year from the day that Breonna Taylor was tragically murdered. We're still here in the midst of a pandemic, still here in the midst of a time where the entire world is experiencing something that we've never experienced before. There's been tragedy, there's been death on scales that many of us have never known. And also, we've been in a time where we've been asked to or made to sit still. We've been made to sit with ourselves, we've been made to sit with each other, and perhaps that's opened up a space for us to sit with some things that we've never had to contend with before. As one of our future guests, Jecorey Arthur, once said in an interview, the shock hasn't exactly been with the Black community. The shock has perhaps been with the white community or the majority population that has never before had to so directly contend or had the space to want to so directly contend with what we're in right now. Many people, through years of protests and people being in the streets and working in many angles to engage social issues, have perhaps heard or listened, but as Jecorey said, they might not have moved into action. So in that vein, almost a year ago, I made a piece called Vigil that was my effort to move people from this listening to this hearing into action. And I wanted to give a bit of context around that, but also talk a little more specifically how arts can move into action. So first, in the journey on that, there was a really amazing collaboration between myself and Teddy Abrams, who is the music director of the Louisville Orchestra. So I wanted to invite Teddy in, and we could talk a little bit about the journey toward creating this piece. Hi, Teddy.
Hi, Davóne. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great, great. This is such a wonderful conversation that you've put together, and I'm so grateful and thankful for the collaboration that we were able to find between ourselves, given the things that we were going through at the orchestra and as a city, and it just kind of fell into place in the most almost unexpected way. That I was able to connect with you through a wonderful supporter of both of ours. And when she told me that you'd written this piece that was in memory and honor of Breonna Taylor, even though it wasn't yet for orchestra, I thought we had to talk about this and see what could be done, because programming the very first concert after everything that we went through last summer was a tremendous responsibility to so many people here. And so I'm just kind of curious, from your perspective, how did that piece come to be, this work called Vigil? Because it already arrived in a certain format by the time we started talking.
Right. It was a pretty long journey up until even that point. It started back in October of 2019. I was in Amsterdam after a couple of times of going there to work with the Dutch National Opera. And I'd met some friends, some musical collaborators that I love to have improv sessions with, jam sessions with. And at a really late night session, I was working with this composer named Davóne. And he writes in an amazing style that's somewhere between Fauré, like French song, and also James Blake and kind of more modern R&B ideas. And so in one take, this song came out that was then called Chorale. And this text came out of nowhere. We didn't write a text down before, but he started playing the chords, and I just sang the words, "Where there is darkness, we'll bring light." And since that song came out in one go, it felt really special. And I thought that song really meant something because it just kind of happened. And then in the midst of early 2020, going into the pandemic, but then the new ability for society to focus on tragedies that have been happening for a very long time. There was a lot of unrest in a general way, but also in my home. I live here in Raleigh, North Carolina with my brother. He works for a national organization that deals with good governance and voter access. So the year of the election and a lot of tension around what's going to happen. And I wanted to do something, as many people wanted to do, to connect to what was going on or have some sort of catharsis for what was going on. And the opportunity presented itself when I was invited by the LA Opera to make some sort of song or video for a recital, just a general concert. But I took that as a chance to say something pretty direct about how I was feeling, which is to take this song and make it into a vigil for the deaths that had happened this year. So the first version of that video took the song in a really close-up shot that was actually done for a video I made for the National Education Association for their Human and Civil Rights Awards banquet. So taking that and also incorporating the imagery of vigils. So different documentation that had happened around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And that was the only imagery in the video. And so that was played for LA Opera and it was received pretty well. But I had feedback from one particular donor, one particular person I'd met before and who supported some of the work that I do on the West Coast. And they were really congratulatory, but they made me feel as though they had engaged in the video as if it was trauma porn. So trauma porn is essentially media that is created with the idea of the majority population in mind, meaning it takes the tragedy of marginalized people and perhaps puts it on display so that people of the majority population could feel consoled. And I really hated that somebody could perhaps feel let off the hook by the piece of art that I had made. So it put me on a longer journey to say, how can I change this thing in order for it to have actual effect? So in talking with my brother, I said, I have an opportunity to put something out there. I have a bit of a platform as an artist. What should I point people to? What can I be saying that actually moves towards change? And he said, I think you're thinking about it the wrong way. It's not that there's one organization, one piece of legislation to point to. There are many people in many different scales in every community that's been doing this work for a very long time. And it's a complicated answer because there are so many people working on the complexity of social justice and social engagement. So I should offer up my platform to them, to people that are literally doing the work. That is the point. So I took some time and thought, how can I change this video to do something better? I took out all the imagery of vigils, saying, it's not enough for people to go watch those pictures and think that they participated. People don't get that. A majority white audience, even from arts institutions that venerate classical music, are not allowed to be into that, at least, under my view. So I filled it with simple instructions. That's kind of like an embodiment exercise, partly from colleagues that I work with, stuff we do to get into our bodies to perform. Things like feel the weight of your body in the seat, feel the texture your hand is touching, notice your breathing. Things that really can settle somebody and put them in their body so that they can receive something with their minds. Because I had felt that statement, Breonna Taylor was shot dead in the middle of the night. She was unarmed. She was innocent. That was something rattling around in the news, being megaphoned throughout the news, social media, endlessly. But I was fearing that people weren't emotionally engaging that statement. So I thought, if I'm singing a song, if it's peaceful, if it's focused, if I'm looking at you right in the face, you might actually have to emotionally contend with what's going on. So we got to the point of making this current version of the video. So with that, I'd love us to take a look at it.
his darkness will bring light. Where there is darkness, we will bring light.
So I wanted to say those steps at the end were in an effort to lead people to the specified social engagement or the potential for that, to say, perceive what you're feeling, think about what actually connects to or is the cause of that, find organizations that deal with that problem and support those as you are able. But a continued part of this journey has been, how do you specify that? How do you give people even more direct roads to potential change, given especially that this video talks about a specific person, a specific tragedy, and a specific potentiality for change? So continuing that, it led to us talking. It led to us thinking, how can this song be brought into the Louisville community, the place where this fight is going on? So Teddy, if you can tell us a little bit about what it was like to think about that opening concert for the Louisville Orchestra, and maybe even situate it in a longer trajectory of what it means for organizations to do that kind of work.
Well, I mean, it's incredibly challenging. I mean, first of all, because our organizations haven't necessarily been set up to either address these kind of challenges head on or to bring about specific action. Generally, that's not part of the conversation in programming, or if it is, it's very much on the periphery. It's not central to the idea of how large arts organizations program. And I think there's always that philosophical background also of wondering where that line is. Do we simply present the art, even if it takes on this subject matter, and let it speak for itself and let it seep into our audiences and community, or do we ask for something more? And it felt like, having experienced what we all experienced in Louisville last summer, that we needed to broaden our thinking significantly in terms of what programming looks like and feels like, and what the continuing conversation and the trajectory of that programming might be after the concert experience. And it's going to be something that requires buy-in from everyone. I feel very strongly as a leader that you cannot just, turn a giant oil tanker, which is what orchestras and opera companies are. You want everybody that's involved in the movement of that giant ship to feel ownership of that new direction. And I believe that that's possible. But it started in this case with our conversations where I said, you have been doing this work. You've created this piece which serves this very important purpose of memorializing something and generating conversation from it while also being an exceptionally beautiful piece. Let's let that be the start to building this relationship out in a concert. And that's where I said, as an artist and a creative person, I don't want to ask you just to come to play this very important first concert since all of the protests began and just show up and do, a prescripted kind of a program and say, well, let's do that one piece. And how about this? Let's build it together. Actually, let's ask you, Davóne, where is your mind as a creator? What would you like to see as you come to our community and you clearly are invested in it and care about it? What would you like to see from a concert with all of that talent and background that you offer? The one piece that we had already chosen was Beethoven's Third Symphony. We did portions of that because that was a piece that obviously has an important history given Beethoven's changing relationship with Napoleon in presenting art that offers a social context. But the rest of it was really collaborative and mostly generated by your own ideas around presenting art in that critical time, which continues to this day.
Thank you. And I really appreciate, we had that first conversation and really hit it off and really came to this idea of, what is it to program a first concert out of the pandemic and in the context that we were in and still are in. And it was really great in a way that Beethoven 3 was there as a kind of ending point or anchor point, because it is known as an unfinished symphony. It has a melody that doesn't actually resolve or harmonically even leaves a lot of unfinishedness. And that's kind of what I decided to build as a program preceding it. It's rolling forward, but this work is not done. There you can see me there. And the music leading up to it involved singing the Black National Anthem. It was really, it was really special to have the space to open a symphony concert with the Black National Anthem, because national anthems are usually, or the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, is usually used to open a symphonic concert at the beginning of the season. So the Black National Anthem, followed by Barber's Dover Beach, which is a piece that talks a little bit about wreckage after the world wars and what it means to see all the beauty in the earth and also notice that we humans continue to wreck it. So opening up that potentiality of humans, being counter to the possibility of beauty. But also, so before that actually was Jessie Montgomery's Starburst. And so with what you said about arts institutions not exactly being set up for social engagement, I'm really curious to challenge that a little bit and say that there is a longer strain of artists, living in the context within which we live and making music in response to that. So, and if we're working under this assumption that art is some sort of reflection of humanity, then socially engaged commentary has always been there, if not maybe just under the surface. And perhaps removal of time has removed us from seeing those inclusions of social engagement as incendiary. We can talk about Shostakovich and his symphonies and in the context that he was in. We can talk about all sorts of people that engaged social issues, including Frederick Rzewski, who wrote the piece Attica, which actually is connected to the Attica prison riots, which is representative of the name of our near guest, Representative Attica Scott. So there is a lineage of this, and it seems like we're in a special time for that membrane or that just under the surfaceness of this engagement to come to the fore. So in talking about that, I wanted to invite amazing violinist, composer, and educator, Jessie Montgomery.
Hello,
Hi, Jessie.
Davóne. Hello.
Hi.
Teddy.
Good to see you.
both.
Where are you coming to us from?
I'm dialing in from Princeton, New Jersey.
Amazing.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, further to what we've been talking about, Starburst, can you tell us a little bit about your motivation for that piece?
Sure. Starburst is the piece itself was really inspired mainly just by this idea of stars exploding in space, literally starburst, and it was inspired by the ensemble that premiered it, which was the Sphinx Virtuosi, amazing all Black and Latino string orchestra, and these were all friends of mine and people who I admired tremendously, and I really saw them as stars and as bursts of energy, like these beautiful bursts of energy in my. And so I think, you know, it was just knowing that they were going to be premiering it, I came up with this sort of really explosive, colorful, kind of you know, really light piece. You know, with the it does have it's light, but it has a driving, like a sort of really driving underpinning. But yeah, so it's a very sort of visually driven piece.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that was a really amazing initial anchor for the concert. In an interview that I heard you give kind of late last year, you had talked about how before maybe this time you had been a bit bashful about being overt about social engagement with your music. But then you said in thinking about it a bit more, that sort of work or thinking about, you know, a larger social context has been a part of your voice the whole way. And I kind of see that in how you describe Starburst and kind of being celebratory of energy of, you know, young youth of color. So what does that continue to be like in this time, you finding this kind of engagement in your work?
Yes. Yeah, well, I'll go back a little bit actually. Because both of my parents were very active in social movements. My mom, in particular, as a theater artist, and really anchoring a lot of her work in her identity as a Black woman and her experiences growing up in the South during segregation and going through the civil rights, you know, experiencing the civil rights movement and many affiliations that she had during that time. And so the idea of art being a reflection of the individual and the larger social experience was very much a part of my like everyday experience in life growing up. And so I always I feel the weight of that and the responsibility of that. And right now, you know, I've had several pieces that have, speaking of the Star Spangled Banner, I have two pieces that have been a commentary on the Star Spangled Banner. Both a piece called Anthem, which was actually a collective piece for young students and teachers to perform together. We did it we did like a guerrilla concert at what was before the site of the MLK monument in DC. We went and before they even built it, we took a bunch, like 30 kids down there, and set up like an outdoor concert without real permission, but and performed this piece Anthem, which was like a collaborative piece with some of our students, the students who had written the words, and then I discovered the overlay between Lift Every Voice and Sing and Star Spangled Banner, that they actually share the same phrase structure. And I came up with that idea, and then that idea sort of found its way into the other piece, Banner, which is also happened to be another commission that was around that same subject, sort of like challenging the implications of what the idea of freedom in the Star Spangled Banner really means, and fusing many different sort of points of view of what that means, sort of into the piece. And you know, those two pieces were sort of like really, really direct and obvious sort of commentary. I think obvious commentary, but but you know, the way that I'm thinking about my service in this, and that I really do think of it as a service. It's the way in which we serve and sort of present and serve our art. I am right now. I feel like in my teaching is where I'm doing a lot of the work, and sort of
Mm,
realizing there's that and mentoring young students who are coming with these really heavy sense of responsibility towards social action on their mind. And these are young people around 18, 19 years old, and mentoring with them, and letting them sort of talk through and work through, what their wishes are, what their identity feels like to them, and how to sort of think about, you know, the fundamentals of their craft in relation to this important piece that, when we were coming up, um, was never a discussion. It was on the table. It wasn't something I started thinking about until 10 years ago,
right.
in my own work as a musician, because music was supposed to be free of that. And so, these are, again, I feel like advocacy for young people, and through their pursuits in the arts is really, that feels like a really, fulfilling act of service for me right now. And in my own art, I'm sort of right now taking I'm taking the approach of Devon, of the, almost like what the lyrics of your piece, where there's darkness, we will bring light. I'm focusing on the light
Hmm.
right now. I'm focusing on what feels free in my art, and what feels honest, and just really trying to. So I'm sort of re-identifying what that is for myself, and I feel, and it's going in this direction of like that what is the what are the contexts in which the art can really heal people. And I think, Devon, you've done a tremendous job with the format of this. I was so glad you didn't bring me on right after that the video, because I needed to take a moment. But it works so beautifully, and I think about the context in which we gather. Again, in the way, in the ways in which we'll get back together. I love the idea of continuing these kinds of conversations, but within live space, and making dialogue, and making the music, the performance of the music, and the presence of the audience, and the interaction between audience and musicians a very, very sort of and it a very interactive and conversational kind of event,
Definitely.
and making that like an acceptable and attractive format. I think that's something that I sort of, it's a little kernel of thought that I've been having lately, to sort of think about how I'll come back.
Yeah. I can't wait till we get back live again. Actually, the last performance I gave was the day that I met you. We were at the Supreme
That's
Court.
right.
We had both had the honor of receiving the Sphinx Medal of Excellence, which notices Black or creators of color, and it was really fortuitous, I think, that we got to meet in that context.
Incredible. I know.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So thank you so much for sharing some of this with us, and we'll bring you back in just a little bit to have a broader discussion.
Thank you.
Teddy,
Yeah.
thank you. See
Yeah.
you really soon.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's
Teddy,
so-
if you
so
want
great.
to tell us, a little bit about Jecorey Arthur. So when I was in Louisville and we worked together, you talked to me about some of the incredible people that you've been collaborating with, one of them which was Jecorey.
Yeah, exactly. And Jecorey Arthur is one of my favorite people in this city. He's one of my dear friends, and a person I got to know pretty much right out of the gate here when I started this job. I was tasked with putting together a community concert about 1 month after having moved here. And it was supposed to be a whole array of bands and individual musicians from all the different genres, which is what I love doing, seeing genres collide. But I didn't really know anybody. And I met Jecorey at this event randomly. It was not a planned thing at all. And he said, I'll help you put that together. And he basically just took on the total responsibility and threw this incredible concert together. It was extraordinary. And I saw him perform because he is a serious combination of talents that I think is very rare. So I'm super excited to introduce Jecorey Arthur, who is known as 1200 as a hip hop artist. He is known as Professor Arthur because he is a teacher at many levels. And he's also known now as Councilman Arthur because he is the youngest ever Metro Councilman for my district, which is downtown Louisville, District 4. And here he is, Jecorey. So welcome.
Peace. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
This is so great to have you. And maybe just kicking it off with, you were in this very unusual position of not only having a background as a classical musician, as a classical percussionist, but also as a hip hop star, but now as a politician and a father.
Yeah, I mean, you probably hear my little girl screaming in the background. It's all really linked. And I always say, Teddy and I, our relationship has really taken us from the school hall to the concert hall to city hall. And if you think about it, you know, the way that the arts, you know, sits in our society, it's a means of not only self-expression, but also self-discovery. And within that, we're just trying to make the world a better place. And we use our arts as a means to do that. And since I've been teaching and rapping and singing about all of these issues over my lifetime, I've always just struggled with, what do I do beyond that? I feel like I should be serving in a different capacity. And now I serve in that capacity at the legislative level, being able to write laws to have long-term sustainable change. And what better person to write a law than someone who has been a part of the advocacy on the arts side? I think that arts is the answer. Arts is involved in every aspect of life. And I'll get into my political process in a minute. But the artist being a legislator is really being creative, being innovative with the way that you approach problems. We are the best problem solvers. So here we are with solutions from an artist's mind.
Yeah. And I mean, that whole approach in your music is a reflection of where you stand and your values, because your music, I mean, you've talked about this. It's not, you know, associated with some of the things that people may find stereotypical about hip hop and rap. You've been very socially focused and conscious in your own lyrics. I mean, they've been about the things that you're now directly dealing with as a politician, right?
Absolutely. When you listen to my music, you'll hear me talking about gentrification, after school programs. You'll hear me talking about how to get involved within your neighborhood. And that's what I'm about. And I'm doing the exact same, but now I'm at the legislative level within our city council.
Amazing. So you and Teddy have had some ongoing collaboration, and in fact, you're working on some new things together. It at least from my experience, it's fairly rare for an arts institution to take on work that is directed from people within the community directly, within the larger context of that organization. So it's really amazing to know that that is happening with you and with you two. Can you tell us a little bit more about that collaboration?
So Teddy has really taken our symphony orchestra from Louisville Orchestra to Louisville's orchestra. And by that, it is now a part of the community. It belongs to the community. We put the service first. Of course, performing from the stage is a part of that service, but also going to those schools, going to the community centers, going to places where youth probably don't have access to that orchestra. And we've even taken it a step beyond that to not only can you have all the access in the world to see the orchestra, but you can be the orchestra. We have a rap school, which is like unheard of when it comes to a symphony orchestra, where students within our community in the West End of Louisville, Black students get to stand on stage virtually or in person with our orchestra, and they get to make the music that they grew up on, the music that they love to make, the music that they recite on a daily basis. And now they see themselves in that orchestra, which goes beyond representation. You know, seeing the orchestra is one thing, but being the orchestra is a whole nother level. And we've been able to create that culture here in Louisville through the institution, through the Louisville Orchestra. And I always really pat the orchestra on the back, because as orchestras across this country are grappling with racism and grappling with how they fit in societal issues, the Louisville Orchestra has been looking in the mirror at itself. And even if we look at the orchestra and say, well, it's still predominantly white, they put me on that stage, and putting me on that stage means I'm bringing the hood with me. It means that the lyrics that I recite on that stage in front of that orchestra are going to be a reflection of racism, a reflection of poverty, a reflection of militarism, which is something we're dealing with when we think about Breonna Taylor's death, her killing. The orchestra has already been confronting those issues, and now we're just continuing to do it. And it's even more relevant today than it was 5 years ago when we first started doing it.
Completely. It's really incredible that you bring the specificity of your life, what you're interested in, and even the work that you do on the legislative side of things into the concert hall, onto the stage. And I think it's the perfect time. It's been time for that sort of work to be happening. A frustration that I've experienced for quite a long time is being in those concert hall spaces and the work and the content of the work being allowed to be nebulous or abstract. And there's a lot of potential there because there's so much resource, there's so much interaction between the larger public and those institutions that we can be a little more direct or overt in what the content is. So it's really inspiring to see that that's part of what you do. And also the educational aspect, bringing young people into that space and allowing that creation and interaction, because I'm excited to see what happens in, 10, 15 years when young people that have had those experiences know that this relic or this thing of the past, a symphony orchestra, can have a new life in a new way because it's inviting new blood into the foundation of its creation. So I really, really deeply appreciate this work that you're both up to.
Yeah, we're so lucky. And I guess, one other question, because now that you have this legislative role, what comes next? How do you as an artist, and you're the only musician on the Metro Council, probably ever on the Metro Council, what happens next with that very specific background and perspective? I mean, do you think that brings something to the table that maybe hasn't been seen before and can do things that wouldn't otherwise be able to be done?
1000%. Now we build a bridge because the artists have a political tie-in. You can be utilized to advocate for political change, whether we're talking about banning no-knock warrants, such as the one that killed Breonna Taylor, or we're talking about funding extremely low-income housing, or we're talking about reparations for Black people who descend from slavery. The artists can be used to amplify policy. And on the flip side, the politicians can be used to amplify the arts. And I'm not just talking about arts that make you feel good or the arts that are something nice to look at that are passive. I'm talking about us understanding that when you support the arts, you're supporting your city having a culture. You're supporting education within your city because this is an educational requirement. You're supporting violence prevention because if I wasn't in my school band, I probably would have been in a gang. I probably would have been in the streets doing something that I had no business doing. So it's definitely a bridge that needs to be built. I'm the one to do it. I'm here as an artist and also now as a politician, and I'm going to make sure that bridge happens so that we can benefit one another, because politics is truly an exchange. And the more we think about that, I think the further we'll go in this world.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. We'll see you in just a little bit. Now we're going to actually bring on someone else working in the legislature, Representative Attica Scott. So,
good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. You and I had got a little bit acquainted not too long ago, and I came to understand you are of 138 House members. There are 2 women of color, or 2 Black women and 1 other woman of color. And you are the first Black woman to have championed a piece of legislation in that House, if I'm right. So I wanted to ask, what has that process been like? What has the journey been with HB 21, Breonna's Law, bringing it from the Louisville city level to the state level?
Thank you for the question. And I just want folks to know that we are actually out today honoring the life of Breonna Taylor. So that's why I'm in my car. Normally I would be in a much more, nice background place, but we are out with community today.
Thank you.
House Bill 21 is what we called Breonna's Law because it actually addressed some of what happened on the night that Breonna Taylor was murdered, including the use of a search warrant that had a no-knock clause. And that clause was to look for, a search warrant that was looking for drugs. And the bill that did pass, that was a no-knock search warrant restriction, actually still contains the ability to issue a no-knock search warrant if you're looking for drugs. So we still haven't actually addressed the issue that led to Breonna Taylor's murder. Our House Bill 21 also had some police accountability measures in it, because we can't, at least from what happened to Breonna Taylor and what our community has been crying out for, we can't separate banning no-knock warrants from police accountability. That's what this is about, police accountability. So that's our House Bill 21, banned no-knock warrants, and it also had police accountability measures.
Amazing.
And you know, this is so wonderful to see you. Thank you for taking time, especially on this day, to be with us. And I admire the work that you're doing so much. And you know, one question I have is that now you're working at the state level, and Kentucky it's a challenging state with a lot of different demographics, and the majority of folks in the legislature don't come from the Louisville region. And I'm curious about those barriers and different backgrounds that you're having to face, and how you're attempting to get folks to be on the same page and understand the perspective that you obviously have lived with.
I appreciate that question, because when I testified this week in support of House Bill 21, Breonna's Law, one of the things that I said to my colleagues is, in the going on 5 years that I've been in the state legislature, I've made it my business to get to know the issues in Appalachia and rural Western Kentucky, but that's not always reciprocated, that my colleagues don't always try to learn more about where I come from. I grew up in the projects of Vita Terrace in Louisville, and I live in the West End of Louisville, which is predominantly Black. My colleagues don't do the same kind of getting to know and understand where I come from as I do trying to understand where they come from. And so it is a challenge, especially when we have anti-protest legislation that's been filed, and one piece has actually passed a House committee and another has passed the Senate committee and the Senate floor. And it feels so personal, because they know what I experienced and what my daughter experienced. And yet you're still filing and trying to pass legislation that would criminalize us for standing up for justice.
And is it just an unwillingness maybe to engage on that level, or a fear, or what can be done to fix that? Because I mean, you have to, when I talk to you right now, I feel the emotion, and I feel the realness of it. How can that change?
Well, one of the things is, every year the legislative body does sexual harassment training. Well, they need to understand what it means to dismantle racism and to be actively anti-racist, because the legislature is steeped in institutional systemic racism. That is what we are experiencing. Just because you're in elected office doesn't mean you automatically become some active anti-racist who's committed to dismantling racism. That is not the case for our legislative body. And so there's a lot of work that has to happen there. And it can't be performative politics, which is what we've seen since January 6th and the insurrection in Washington, D.C. We see state elected officials all of a sudden wanting to study Black people, which we've been studied for 400 years, act on our issues, stop studying us, or who want to, create a work group or a task force or a committee to figure out what they should do as far as policy is concerned. And race, you've got so many examples across the country of what you need to do right now. I've filed bills addressing issues of race, and the legislature's chosen not to act on those bills. So we have so much more work cut out for us, but I know Councilman Arthur and I work together quite a bit, and we'll be having conversations about how we work together at the local and state level to really build the kind of Kentucky that works for all of us.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So continuing this work that you're talking about, especially within your own office, can you tell us the story that you told me about the group of young children that came to visit and the HB 21 logo?
Yes, definitely. So House Bill 21, it's a piece of legislation that really grew out of the protest for justice for Breonna Taylor. And we've been working on this with folks in community. And so 2 weeks ago, in Justice Square Park, which is the heart of the movement for justice for Breonna Taylor here in Louisville, Kentucky, brought almost 100 people in a car caravan to Frankfort, our state capital, to rally in support of House Bill 21 to ban no-knock warrants. It was phenomenal. These were so many folks who had never been to their state capital ever before, but they came because they were standing up for justice for Breonna Taylor and for all of us. And then this week, when we were testifying in committee on the bill, about half of that number of people came up knowing that the bill wasn't going to be voted on. We were just discussing it in committee, but they came anyway to be in solidarity and support of me. And one mom brought two of her kids and she asked them, do you know why we're here? And they said, yes, of course, Breonna's Law, HB 21. And I love the fact that they knew what that was, but they knew what it was because so many of the folks who've really grown in this movement and figured out how to use their artistic ability created graphics that were really simple to understand about what HB 21 is, what Breonna's Law is, what it means to ban no-knock warrants. And it was so simplified that kids got it and they saw it enough that they understood why they were coming to the state capitol. So that was pretty significant for me.
It's absolutely incredible. So amazing to know that, artists and art that with some intentionality behind what they're trying to talk about was helpful in the message, even to kids. And with that, I wanted to open up the discussion and bring everybody back to talk a little bit. We'll just wait for everybody to drop in. Hello. We have a new guest too on the panel. Hello. Jecorey, who's our new guest?
This is Aaliyah Arthur, my little angel.
Welcome, Aaliyah.
Hey,
Hello. But I wanted to say, Representative Scott, what you talked about seems like a really incredible way that art allowed messaging that's led to even young people understanding legislative process. So I wanted to open up this larger question about what is the potential for artists and arts institutions to be more intentional with their messaging? We have art that exists in a very nebulous or abstract place, especially in the concert hall sometimes. But what can we do to harness those funds, those audiences, in order to lead to some other things? And just a little sidebar, I'm currently teaching a course this semester that's about interdisciplinary storytelling, and it's with a really close colleague, Zach Winokur. We have this question or this idea that, we in the performing arts, we have a lot of tools for storytelling, sing, dance, all sorts of things in order to draw someone's attention to a story. But often the stories we're telling are not the best ones or not the most important ones. And actually, people from the social sciences, people who are actually organizing and making legislative change, those are the stories to be told. So we're trying to take performing arts tools and offer them to people telling perhaps more valuable stories. So just in that vein, I'd love for anyone to jump in and talk a bit about what they see as potential for intentional art making around messaging.
I'm happy to jump right in. Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
Well, I just wanted to jump in because I'm thinking about today and this past years we've been seeking justice for Breonna Taylor. And what I've appreciated is how people have been using their art to amplify the message of what justice means as we've been out for months, that we haven't lost, making sure people know that we haven't lost sight of wanting to make sure that every officer involved with Breonna Taylor's murder is fired, arrested, and charged, whether it's, in song, and there have been so many songs that have been created about Breonna Taylor, or videos that have been created, documentaries, photographers who've really honed their skills as part of this movement. All kinds of art has been created, and graphic artists and designers. And so it has really helped this movement to be able to get its message out when we're talking about people who struggle from, paycheck to paycheck or no check to no check, who are out on the front lines, people who are houseless, who are trying to get justice for Breonna Taylor. So we don't always have the means. We don't always have the bully pulpit. So we need the artistry to help us get the word out. So just for me, much gratitude to the folks who've been stepping up and using what they have to offer to help us get justice.
Incredible.
Yeah, and I think that leads to, this question of, especially in Louisville specifically, so much of the national conversation has been about the tragedy and the negativity, which is accurate. It happened, and it's now part of our story, and we cannot turn our back on this story. We can't hope that it goes away and people forget and that the news cycle just carries it through. But we also have to find some kind of future for the city where we can be proud of what we're doing as a result of the negativity. And I wonder, you know, for everyone, you know, what role artists can play in not just being kind of sidelined in the city's life, but helping be a part of that story of our identity, because our identity now is inextricably linked to what has happened in the last year. We cannot get away from it, but we have to find a way forward that's not only you know, bound to tragedy. So I wonder, I know it's kind of an open question.
I have 10 steps that you can be in any order. They can work side by one another, but I have 10 steps that I think about when I think about change, social, political change. And they kind of come from Dr. Martin Luther King's direct action steps, but I've expanded them to 10. One is to communicate, and that means you tell someone about an issue, because sometimes it's just a matter of making sure that you're delivering a message. Sometimes people just don't know what they don't know if you've never lived that experience. 2 is to educate. You dive deep into that experience, into that issue, and break it down. Why is it happening? How is it happening? Who is it happening to? 3, collaborate. You work with other people to figure out how you're going to approach that issue. 4, you delegate. You decide who's doing what. And we know that happens in an orchestra. You know, you got the brass section, the strings, the percussionists, you might have vocalists, you have brass, you have different sections. You have your conductor like Teddy. 5, you activate. You actually go through with it. You do the thing. You do whatever you decide you're going to do from that group. 6, you agitate. Sometimes you got to really press, and you really got to get on people's nerves, and you really got to disrupt. You might got to get in the streets and shout and pout and make sure people are aware of everything that you are going through and you're dealing with and what the problem is. 7, you negotiate. You sit down with Representative Attica Scott, or maybe you've already been a part of the work that she's doing, and you figure out how our elected officials can do their job to follow through with solving the issue. 8, incredibly important, is you legislate. Representative Attica Scott is a legislator. I am a legislator on our Louisville Metro Council. We write laws to better lives. And we know that some laws have been written to wrong us. So as a Black legislator, we got to write the laws and write them, which means correct them. 9, you regulate. You have to maintain it, sustain it, make sure it's a part of the culture and climate of the place that you're in. And 10, after it's all said and done, you communicate, you educate, collaborate, delegate, agitate, you negotiate, you legislate, you regulate. 10, after you get through those steps and you create some political, social change, you celebrate. And I say those steps because of this. The artist can be involved in any of those. Now, oftentimes we think of the artist being involved on the celebratory side. We think of the artist sometimes even being involved, number one, the communication side, the communicate, raising awareness about an issue. But the artist can be involved in every single step of the way. And I'm proud to be an artist that's going to be involved in number 8, which is to legislate. So I just say that those are some political tools to put on the table. The artist can pick up any of them and use them. But that's the way that I can see the artist getting involved in that change.
That's very good. I need to print that out.
We've got to share these steps further. There's a question from the audience that maybe everybody could speak to a little bit before we wrap up. Do you have hope right now, and what does hope look like to you moving forward? Jessie, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, I have hope right now, because we have to have hope is an essential part of moving through this very challenging moments that we're facing. I think hope looks like action. It looks like taking action in whatever place you're in. What are your looking at, what your faculties are? What do I have in place where I can be of service? And speaking with, whoever's your superiors, supposedly, your community of the sort of operations teams that are working within the organizations you're working in, and speaking directly with them about what your vision is. And your vision is to have more of a more representative artists of color on your programming, continuing to make that a priority, and also more adding to maybe a little bit of the question before, trusting that that the decisions that the organization is going to make around these, around how to move forward, that trusting that any kind of movement is worthwhile, and that some kind of action is better than no action, and bringing in artists who make social issues a priority within their own art, because the way that they transmit that is going to be the most, effective, sort of, loudspeaker maybe for the direction of the organization and, where they're trying to go. So, those kinds of collaborations with artists and are just so important. And I think that everyone just has to trust themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Jessie, if I could follow up with one more question, this is for
Yes.
everyone, but kind of representing, the music establishment from the institutions side here. What can these institutions, the larger performing arts centers, the orchestras, the opera companies, do to extend their thinking and their capabilities to the super talented people like you and like Davóne, so that you're part of the conversations as we all grow? And even if you don't have official jobs as resident composer or principal clarinet or something, what can we do to make it so that there is an open dynamic of free flowing information, just in general, not the last thing that gets thought of after everything else is budgeted and approved?
Yeah. Generally, and just to wrap us up a little bit, because we're at time, what can larger arts institutions do? I was really inspired by what Representative Scott was saying about how art can be made intentionally to educate, to bring people into narratives. And I think there's a potential here for arts institutions to be more, I've used this word a lot, but intentional, if not overt, about all of the resources that go to commissioning art that does the storytelling that is important today. And that can be, it seems like it can be a little complicated because, for some people that's about partisanship and whose story are you telling? But that's part of the hardness of this conversation, I mean, are there ways for us to come together and tell overall stories that everybody needs to be engaged with? But yeah, it's my hope that yes, artists have always been engaged in this conversation, but how do we also bring institutions who actually have certain agency support resources to lift up things that we just haven't lifted up enough. So with that, I wanted to say thank you, everyone, for making the time to join us. Thank you, everybody that's watching. Thank you, Lincoln Center, for giving us this bit of space. And also thank you, everybody backstage, Ben and Jenny and Davin, who have been helping us out. So thank you. And I hope that you take some of what we've talked about today into the rest of this day, but also moving forward about what we can all do to remember, lift up, and commemorate for change.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.